Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. I got to record these Thursday morning just to fit everything into the schedule this week. I think this is actually the earliest I've ever recorded a video before. I was up watching the sunrise, doing some other work, and figured, well, let's do this now too to make sure that I don't miss it. So let's see if I'm loopy in the morning or something like that. But looks like only questions on one platform this week, probably because I'm doing them so early in the day. But let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Obed Samuel wants to follow up from last week's question regarding the RGB modded Genesis with 9-pin DIN. Their customer wants to know he could use a Retro Gaming Cable's Genesis 2 cable wired for C-Sync through an RGB to comp RetroTink and then add male-to-male HD Retrovision cables. In my head, I can't see why this wouldn't work, albeit a little convoluted, but again, I don't know much about component cables or the RGB to comp to advise him. Or would I still have to run C-Sync through composite video on the 9-pin DIN with a resistor? So that setup of just a regular Genesis 2 cable wired for C-Sync, that will absolutely work the way you've already wired it, assuming you wired it correctly. No offense. And once it's in the RGB to comp, it would just be like any other device. So yes, HD Retrovision just pass through RCA cables will totally work fine in that way. So absolutely would work in the setup. Respectfully, if you're going to be doing installs for more than just your buddies or anything like that, you're going to want to really read up on all of this stuff and get all of the details, because if you're somebody that mods for yourself or your buddies, then whatever, if you have a problem, go ask questions and figure it out as you go. But if you're going to be doing this and having a lot of customers come in, you really need to understand the full scope of how all of these signals work, because it's kind of like a pharmacist, right? You go to pick up a new prescription that you got from a new doctor, and the pharmacist goes, wait, you can't take this because your other doctor gave you another prescription. You kind of have to be that person, just to say, all right, well, what are you plugging this into? How are you connecting it? What cable do you have? And it shouldn't be like that. But the problem is, just very simply, RGB was kind of thrown to the side for most of these consoles, and some of them didn't even support it at all. So anything that we use is really community-based. Also, most of the time, SCART used composite video as sync, not C-Sync, even though the consoles actually outputted that. So you run into a lot of issues when you're doing mods for people that might have mixed and matched cables or different kind of components and stuff like that. So it's confusing and it's annoying, but it kind of just is what it is. And it's just something you're going to have to get used to. So, just keep researching this stuff and just keep trying to figure out all the different nuances. DW623 had a question about a consumer-grade TV. This is actually my second response. I kind of changed my mind on it as I was reading through. So rather than read through the entire question again, the situation is DW623 has a TV that their parents have been holding on to them, a Sony Trinitron KV-32XBR45. It only has S-video inputs, but they basically want to know if it's worth the trouble of holding on to and then eventually transporting cross-country once they're eventually able to go back and get it. So is it better to restore that TV that there's some sentimental value for that used to be their main TV for a while, or should they just concentrate and spend their time on finding a professional video monitor or something else? It's a great question, and it's a confusing answer based on what type of TV this actually is. And the model number, you would have to look it up. You can't just say everything that says XYZ is one way. You have to look up the manuals and the specs and everything. Now, for this particular TV, if I'm right, if this is the one that's a larger black plastic curved glass, and on the top of the plastic is the control panel, like the top center, it looks like almost an infrared receiver and control panel for the TV. If that's the one I'm thinking of, that's not an HD CRT, it's just a standard def one, then that's actually an excellent TV. It's everything that you would want in a retro gaming monitor, and if you have some sentimental value for it, sure, it's absolutely worth replacing the capacitors, probably being able to do an RGB mod. And while it won't ever look exactly like a professional video monitor, in my opinion, it'll look great. You won't have any regrets doing any of that, especially if it's sentimental value. So if it's the one I'm thinking of, I would say go for it. However, I do think it's worth spending a moment explaining why I would give that advice, and just the steps that I personally look for when I'm hunting down CRTs. And the first thing I always look for is, in most scenarios, I prefer curved glass because not only is it the original look, but it also is compatible with all light gun games, whereas flat glass CRTs sometimes are not. So that's always something I would look for. Next, is it an HD CRT? And if it is, how does it process gaming signals? So some models, specifically Panasonic, that people have tested, are able to pass through whatever resolution that you send it, and can accept up to 1080i. However, a lot of others, including some later model XBRs, process everything and upscale it to 1080i. And this has a couple of different problems. First, it's using kind of a modern scaling chip in there. So that means 240p is processed as 480i, which is bad for everything pre-GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Dreamcast. Everything before that, it's not going to look right. You get the same weird shakiness that you do with those bad scalers. Also, it's going to probably add lag, 1 to 2 frames at a minimum. And because it scales everything to 1080i, it might not be the look that you're going for. So if it were one of those, and your goal was to play retro pre those 3 consoles I just mentioned, then I don't think it would be a good choice. However, those tend to be great for something like PlayStation 2 because the library is predominantly 480i, and in my opinion, I've seen those look better scaled, even with the lag on those HD CRTs, than they would deinterlacing on a flat panel. Now, each game is going to look different. Everybody's eyes are different and they'll have different preferences. But if I had a choice between playing PlayStation 2 in 480i only on a flat panel or on an HD CRT, which automatically scales up to 1080i, then definitely. And of course, also, what inputs does it have and all that stuff. So that's what you're going to want to do every time anybody is trying to look for a new CRT. Is it okay that it's flat glass? Does it scale everything to HD? And does that matter for the console that you're using? Some of the HD CRTs would even scale 480p and 720p to 1080i. And it does change the look of things. So, if you stumble across one of those for free and you have the room for it, definitely grab it. But if you're talking about what you're talking about, going through and doing a full restoration and putting the time and effort into making this your main gaming, retro gaming monitor, you would really want to double check all of that before spending the time on one of the HD ones. And like I said, it might actually be the perfect solution for you, or it might not. But if that TV that you mentioned is the one I'm thinking of, it should be awesome and definitely worth it, even if you eventually do pick up a different kind of professional video monitor. And it's also the basic advice I give people too. If you're into light guns or any of the 3D glasses games, which I do like, or if you just want an original experience, there's nothing wrong, as long as you have the space, of course, with just grabbing a TV, any TV, and using its RF or composite inputs for either the original blended experience or light guns or something, and then using a scaler or a professional video monitor if you want the sharper experience. So that's why I kind of say any CRT is amazing to start with and then figure it out from there. But hopefully the advice on both your exact TV and HD CRTs in general is a help to people. 8% Android said they're trying to find a device that allows them to switch between inputs for USB audio from a PC, optical audio from a Mister, and RCA to a USB output for a pair of powered speakers. So far, I've come up blank. So throwing the wrench into the mix is that USB audio from your PC. I don't know of any device or any AVR that you could just plug USB into. I mean, that's the entire point of a computer audio interface. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding that. I apologize if I am. But it kind of sounds like you would just need a basic AVR or audio switch. unless you're talking about actual USB as audio, and in which case, I don't know if something like that exists. But for example, if you were doing USB audio output to optical, I've seen a few different types of switches that have an optical audio switch. I don't know if I've seen ones that have optical and RCA analog inputs other than basic AVRs. So I would kind of look into all of those different things. But yeah, audio switches are strange. They're not as common as video switching. And I don't know anything that would switch USB like that. So, do some more Googling, check out some respected reviewers like Podcastage and a few others that talk about these things. And, if anybody knows of any audio interface that or audio switch that allows for all of those different formats, please post in the comments. I've never heard of anything like that. But once again, I could be misunderstanding your definition of USB audio from a PC. So please feel free to correct me, and I'll try my best to get some relevant answer that's not, I don't know. Looks like Rick Lewis has 2 questions. First, they're trying to learn how to solder. Tim Worthington has an 8-pin mini-DIN SCART cable on his website, which is exactly a cable they need. Is this a good beginner project to make? If I screwed it up, could I screw up something in the console or just have a non-working cable? So if you shorted pins together, you could absolutely damage stuff. However, I took a look and I actually thought those came pre-assembled, but I did find the kit that you were talking about, and it does seem like a pretty cool beginner project because as far as I saw on the site, all of the surface mount components already were soldered to that board inside the cable, and you're only adding the bigger connectors. Now, if I'm wrong and those boards come blank and you have to put all those tiny little surface mount components on, then no, it's definitely not a good beginner project. It's not even a project I would enjoy. I could do it. I do it all the time. I don't, that's really fine soldering work. So as long as that board comes with all of the tiny stuff already on it and you're just putting on the bigger connectors, it's totally fine. The only thing I would recommend is make sure that you have a multimeter to test for continuity. You do not need an expensive piece of hardware. In fact, I keep it right here. Voltar found one. I think these are the ones that I have listed in the Amazon store, and they're dirt cheap, and they do everything that you would need for basic electronics. Test DC voltage, test to find out the resistance of components, and test continuity, which is done by, I'm not sure if you're watching or listening, but putting it on that symbol, then you have to hit the button once, and then once you do that, you put the 2 probes in the 2 rightmost connectors, and when you touch the metal together, it beeps. And that's pretty much all you would need. So you don't need anything expensive. You don't need anything crazy. It is kind of a pain to go through and test every single pin, but it's necessary. It's something that you should really do to make sure you didn't short anything. And just to show, that's it. When you touch the metal together, you hear that little beep, and that's all you need. So I would go through and do that with all of the pins, and just note that all ground is going to beep together. That's totally normal, but make sure red isn't shorted to blue, blue isn't shorted to green. Make sure anything with voltage on it isn't shorted to each other. It's annoying and a pain, but once you do this, then you get used to that workflow. So the next project you do, solder everything together, check with a multimeter, it gets faster every time you do it. So just be patient. Next, you've heard me talk about the YouTube algorithm a lot. When you're wrapping up your videos, just talking about where people can support, I always shut the video off. Does it help you more if I keep it going to the end? I generally do this for most YouTube channels, but would definitely leave it playing if it helps the creators to watch to the end. That is an incredibly nice thing for you to ask. I really appreciate it, but I'm always pretty headstrong about watch and listen to this content any way that suits you. I don't like that we all have to tiptoe and placate around YouTube's imaginary rules that are always changing and may or may not even matter. So while I don't think it matters, even if it did, I would tell you to stop watching whenever you feel like it. A lot of the videos I do have more stuff at the end that's really relevant, but never the end. As I've said before, as soon as you hear me say something like, well, that's it for this time, it's basically just anything after that is for people that have only just discovered me, and I just want to let them know, like, hey, I'm not a YouTuber. I actually run a website has a vast library of stuff that far exceeds the YouTube side, and a podcast too. So if you're already familiar, then it's totally useless to you. So I would say shut that immediately off and do not waste your time. The only other thing would be, if you're halfway through a video and you're like, I don't know if this is for me, just check the timestamps. I always put them in for everything, pretty much every video now. And that way you could just see, like, is there something more coming? Is there how to update the firmware? Is there something I stuck in at the end that might not be relevant to everybody? But that's not what you were asking. Just to answer your direct question, no, shut that off. Don't waste your time. Thank you very much for asking. That's nice of you. And thanks also for the kind words. Really appreciate it. Kelv SYC wants to know, with the new interest in lag testing HDMI, what are your thoughts on wireless HDMI transmitters and receivers for those people who want to use them with their OSSC, RetroTink, or HDMI modded hardware? It is my strong opinion that I would never ever use wireless anything unless you absolutely have to. And I've had a lot of professional experience with this in a lot of different fields, not just gaming and lag and stuff like that. And I've been testing these since they were first released, when they were still in demo form. The company I used to work with tested wireless HDMI for a couple of projects we were potentially working on. Then another company I worked for was doing wireless video transmissions over Wi-Fi and also tried wireless transmitters. And the problem with all wireless anything is the more wireless signals and the more interference, the more problems. So I'm sure somebody has a demo somewhere of a zero lag HDMI receiver and transmitter where they're in a barn in the middle of a field somewhere with the only wireless network other than that one is a mile away. And I'm sure in that scenario, it would probably be fine, but go to some place like Manhattan and forget it. You're going to have lag. It's going to drop connection. Wireless signals in general have been getting better over the years, but still, the more you have on the same frequency, the worse everything is going to perform. So I would never, ever use wireless anything unless absolutely possible. And in fact, while I do have wireless in my Mister, whenever it's hooked up to one setup, I'll grab the network cable and plug that in, even though I'm only doing basic updates. Like, for me, it's that much of a difference that I could see and have seen over the years. So as a general rule, don't use wireless anything unless you have to. And not only for those devices, but for your other devices too. So if you have 5 things that could very easily be plugged into the network, you turn off their Wi-Fi, plug them in, and now your cell phone and your tablet's going to work faster because there's less other stuff on the network. So sorry for my little IT rant, but you just you stumbled on something that was kind of a fun and weird trigger for me because, there was years of, there's no reason why we can't do this wirelessly. Look how much money we'll save. And, all right, call in Bob to break it for him, to show him what doesn't work. I mean, that was my life, like at least 10 different occasions throughout previous jobs and stuff like that, just kind of going in and showing real world implementations of technology and stuff like that. So, hopefully you didn't think don't take that personally. I'm not coming down on you. I'm just, kind of laughing and venting about all wireless technologies and how amazing and kind of not amazing they could be at the same time. A couple of questions from Zags, and I'm not going to read the question. I'm just going to explain it because I want to make sure I'm clear about it, because this stuff could be really confusing. And I'm not making fun of your question. I just want to make sure I'm clear about the answer. So the main question is, can you route component video through a SCART head through a SCART switch? And this would be for the scenario in which, let's say you have a G-SCART switch with 8 ports, and 4 or 5 of them have RGB SCART from classic consoles like Genesis, Super Nintendo, etc. But you also have a Wii or an original Xbox or something that you could get component video cables that output just the RGB lines on the SCART connector are Y, PB, and PR. And the answer is, it depends on the switch. So any manual switch like the 6-port Otaku, sure, you could route anything you want through that. The latest G-SCART switch, I believe you can, but the previous ones did detection on the sync line, so you actually wouldn't be able to. The really old G-SCARTs, you could put it in the last port, and as long as all other consoles are off, it just defaults to the last port. So it's not auto switching, it's just passing through whatever's there. So And I don't really know anything about the Hydra. I didn't like it at all when it was first released. It had a ton of issues, and every time there's a new release of it, the creator says, all issues are fixed, this is a new revision, and then I'll get 5 emails from 5 different people saying, the new one's awesome, the new one still has a problem, the new one fixed the other issues, the new one has new issues. So I don't know. I don't want to, I don't have the time to keep up with that. And there was some weird history with that Switch anyway that really turned me off about it. But, and also you had mentioned that, Wii, yes, you can have RGB SCART from a Wii, or you could have cables that pass component video. Same thing with Xbox. If you buy an original Xbox RGB cable, though, it's only going to be 480i. So you would need to buy the community-built component video over SCART. And as far as Dreamcast goes, that's all VGA, and the SCART ones that you find have a sync combiner that just converts RGB HV to RGBS. So it's there is no, at the moment, actually there is no Dreamcast that outputs component over SCART. That's probably never going to be a thing. So I just wanted to clarify that with you. Now, you also mentioned these adapters, and they're pass-through adapters that do exactly what I just described. So there's one on the screen now that allows you to send the RGB over RCA connectors, as well as left and right audio, composite video, and S-video, and it'll send those through the SCART pins. And that's for exactly what I described at the very beginning. If you just have signals that you want to pass through the existing pins, and you have knowledge of what's going on in the output side. So, for example, with the connector that you're showing now, if you have a full RGB setup and you wanted to route your Wii's component video cable into this, as long as your switch was compatible and your output device is compatible, you could do that. So in the case of the very latest G-SCART switch, you would just be able to use this. And then if you're going into, say, an open source scan converter, once you turned on the Wii, you would just switch the input from input number 1 RGB to input number 1 component video. This stuff's really confusing, and I'm sorry that it is, but the reason for all of this is kind of like I discussed before, is that for RGB SCART, the way we use it today is not really the way it was ever designed to be used. And SCART is the only connector that people continue to use, is because it's the only one that doesn't have a worldwide global implementation of something else. So VGA, for example, D-sub, your average person, even your average nerd that sees that, will see 31 kilohertz 480p or higher RGB HV, and won't even think that you could run RGBS through it, and won't even think that you could run 15 kilohertz original signals through it. Whereas your average person sees a SCART connector and goes, what's that? Or if you're in Europe or in Japan, you see that and you know, oh, this could be composite or this could be RGB, which at the very least would make you say, well, let me look into this. So the fact that SCART is what's used isn't because it's the best or more convenient. It's just because of the history behind everything, and because for a while there, you could still get original manufacturer-made RGB cables for SCART, whereas you couldn't get them with any other connector on it. So when you're talking about these pass-through adapters, when you're talking about mixing and matching resolutions, all of this stuff is possible, just depending on if your switch, how your switch detects the auto detection on each color, and what your target device is all about. And also note that none of these switches or none of these pass-through adapters change a signal. You're just routing signals through it. If I confused you more than I clarified things, then the best thing to do is just not mix and match. I mean that respectfully. It's just, there's so much that can go wrong in these things, and it's such a pain, and it's so confusing that if the video signals start to make your head hurt, I would just keep them all separate, and that way even visually looking at it, component video, RGB, composite video, and you don't have to worry about this stuff. So let me know if you need more clarification. Hopefully I'm not half asleep and just made it worse. But anyway, good question. Well, that's it for this week. If you're new to any of these Q&As, please ask whatever question you have wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way these services work, I can't go back and check older Q&As. I would never be able to figure out what's a new question or an old one, and it is kind of more of a fun workflow to just scroll through all the latest questions. So anything at all you got, post it in the latest post on the whatever Q&A page that you support on. And if I forget to answer your question, it's never intentional. It's either that I accidentally skipped it, I deleted the file in post, or most likely you posted a question before or after I started already recording. And in days like today, where I record much earlier than usual, there's a good chance a few questions are going to come in as this video is rendering. So, I never skip anybody on purpose. It's always a mistake. Just please re-ask if you have any issues with that, or if I forget or whatever else. But anyway, as always, thanks so much to everybody who participates in these, and thank you, of course, to everybody that supports, because it's your help that's keeping all of this stuff going. So thanks, and I'll see you next week.